Or should I say, good morning, deplorables. I love it. All right, we're going to have a good time. We're going to tell a few stories. I'm going to answer your questions, but I want to just say from the bottom of my heart, thank you for coming to Washington, D.C. and making sure that Washington, D.C. is yours and not anybody else's. I appreciate it. And more importantly for me, thank you for supporting our greatest president in the history of this country, Donald J. Trump. I tell you what, now my good friend Jim Jordan, Jim would say that I need to bring the diesel this morning. That's what he says when he talks about making sure that you actually bring the message. He says you got to bring the diesel. So here's what I want to make sure that we do. You know, we're only a few blocks right here from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. You know, we're very close. Now, I can tell you that it wasn't too long ago that I was on the campaign trail with then candidate Donald Trump. And nobody thought he was going to win. You know, the polls, CNN, MSNBC. Now, I know none of you watch them. No one believed that Donald J. Trump would win. And yet, what happened was across this country, I heard somebody earlier is from Oregon. I'm glad that you're here. We know that we have half of the conservatives here from Oregon now that you're here. But no one believed it, whether it was from California to North Carolina or from Maine to Florida or in between. Nobody believed that this president was going to be elected. So I was actually on his plane back then. You know, he had this pretty nice plane that had Trump on the side of his plane. Now, this is the only president that went backwards when he actually got Air Force One. I'm just telling you, his personal airplane was pretty nice. And so we get on this and we're flying and we fly because in North Carolina, it was one of those battleground states. I happened to be a member of Congress from there. And because no one thought he would win, a lot of the other elected officials didn't want to campaign with him. They were going to let him do it all on his own. And, you know, they said, well, you know, you're on your own, Donald Trump. Well, guess how many of them are now wishing that they had campaigned with the President of the United States? All of them. You're exactly right. So sometimes you have to get involved even when the outlook doesn't look that great. And that's why you being here is so critically important. Now, I'm here in front of you. I never wanted to be a member of Congress. It was never on my bucket list because I was a pretty shy individual. Now, I'm up here speaking to you, and there's lights glaring. Yesterday, there were so many cameras. I was actually sitting right beside Robert Mueller's attorney yesterday when actually, well, it was a good day for Republicans yesterday, wouldn't you say? So as I watched that, you know, it was never on my bucket list because I was like you. I was a student. I was, you know, all I wanted to do is actually love my country, make a living. Well, not just a living. I wanted to make a really good living. And yet I did that. I lived the American dream because I'm a nobody from nowhere. I didn't come from a well-connected family. I didn't have an accent like Sebastian Gorka, you know, where I could actually talk like, you know, I have this unbelievable accent that makes people, you know, people just fall in love with his accent, don't they? You know, I'm from North Carolina. I tell you, I appreciate it. You know the difference between North Carolina and South Carolina? It's better. Well, I like the way you're thinking, but actually in South Carolina, it takes 4 syllables to say hello, and it only takes 3 in North Carolina. You know, we talk just a little bit faster than South Carolina, but a whole lot slower than New York. Wouldn't you agree? All right, so here's the thing is, it wasn't on my bucket list. I can remember I had lived the American dream. I had made a very good living, and yet I was concerned that my country, that we were losing it, that the liberal left was taking it over, that Washington, D.C. no longer represented the values that I held dear. And I can remember praying about it, and my wife and I, we were praying, well, should I run for Congress? I got the answer. I believed. I can remember still, I was driving in part of the district. I got that answer. I felt like there was a calling to run for office. Now, I had a great company. I really didn't want for anything. And yet I felt like we needed to sacrifice that and run for office. So when I made that decision, I called my wife and I said, honey, I'm feeling like I'm led to run to be a member of Congress. She said, honey, I support you 100%. And I then got physically ill, had to pull over on the side of the road and throw up. I didn't want it. And you know what? When I got here, I realized that Washington, D.C. was in a lot worse shape than I ever imagined it to be. You know, because a lot of people campaign. You've heard them. Actually, you've campaigned for candidates, haven't you? How many of you have actually knocked doors or made phone calls or volunteered? A lot of you. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for being a part of it. But what happens is they campaign one way and they come up here and act another way, don't they? It is time that we make sure that they have a backbone of steel. It is time. Some members of Congress have a backbone like a banana. It has good shape until you peel it back and you realize it's pretty mushy. Don't you think it's time that we take back this country for the values that we hold dear and make sure that America indeed is first again? It is time that we take it back. So as I look out and I see all of you out there, I can tell you there are congressmen and women, there are senators, in fact, there could even be a future president in our midst. And yet, you are many times ridiculed, scorned. In fact, when you speak up for your values, what happens in your particular school or campus? What do? They try to shut you down, but will they ever shut you down if you're willing to stand? Are they going to hear you at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue when you're willing to stand up for America and what makes America great? Are they going to hear you? So do you mind if I tell you one story about the president? Is that now you all got to hear the president in person is what I heard, right? I'm telling you, he doesn't normally just do that. Charlie Kirk has real good connections. I just want to let you know that. Charlie is not only a friend of the president's, but he's a friend of mine. We were actually texting back and forth yesterday. We were trying to work it out for y'all to come to the Capitol to actually support the president during the Mueller investigation, and the Capitol Police were not willing to give you a permit. And I was afraid that if you came to the Capitol, you might get arrested. Now, I know a lot of you would have thought that was a real thrill. I figured that. But I told Charlie that as much as you might have thought it was a thrill, your parents would not. And so I just want to say thank you for being willing to stay in the fight. And I can tell you that when you stay in the fight and you've got a president in the Oval Office like this particular president, it makes a big difference. So a true story that actually happened really early on in the presidential administration. Early on, Reince Priebus was still the chief of staff at that particular point. And I went over there because I was a little concerned, because the president gets in, and what happens is the swamp here will suck you in. The swamp tries to change just about everybody, and you're here now, and we call it the swamp. Some of the politicians here, they think it's a hot tub. They love being here. And yet the president was here, and I can remember one particular day I went in and I was actually talking to Reince Priebus, and I said, you know, Reince, the president needs to do this, and the president needs to do that. And I was just really being very direct and forthright. And as I was looking at that, you know, I was being very passionate in the way that I communicated. And so I left the White House. I got in the car. Actually, my wife was waiting for me in the car. We took off, and about 20 minutes down the road, I get a phone call from Reince Priebus. Reince says, Mark, where are you? I said, well, I'm almost back to my apartment. And he says, well, can you turn around and come back and tell the president what you just told us? Well, now my first thought, because I'd been pretty passionate, is you work for the president, why don't you tell him? But I said, sure, I'll be glad to tell the president. And so I wasn't quite back yet. I stopped, and I got my wife to get an Uber to get her all the way back to the apartment. And I turned around, I came back, and as I came back, I come walking into the Oval Office, and it's the first time that I'd ever been in the Oval Office. A Republican member didn't get invited a lot under Obama. I want to just a news flash there for you. And so as I'm there, I walk into the Oval Office, and actually the president wasn't in the Oval Office. He was in a little side office that's right opposite of it, where he does a lot of his reading and work. And as he's there, he said, Mark, come on in. Come on in. One of my favorite congressmen. Well, I know that I had campaigned with him, but I was a little nervous. You know, I was going to have to tell him something that I had been real passionate about, thinking that the president needed to do something. And so I go in and I start advocating very directly with the president of the United States. I said, Mr. President, you need to do this and you need to do that. And as I'm doing that and I'm talking to him, I'm looking down and he notices that I'm distracted. Because right in front of the president was about a 12-inch block of wood with a red button in the middle of it. And so I would talk to him and I'd look down at that red button. I'd talk to him and look down at the red button. Finally, he says, it makes you nervous, doesn't it? I said, oh, no, it doesn't make me nervous. And so I continued to advocate just a little bit. And I looked down at that red button again. And finally, he hits the red button. My eyes get as big as silver dollars. I'm looking for incoming from anywhere. And I'm going, oh, my goodness, what is going to happen? And out of this closet, to my right, comes this Marine dressed in full uniform. And he puts a Diet Coke right there in front of the President of the United States. I go, Mr. President, that is pretty neat. He says, you want to see it again? Boom, there was one for me. He has such a great sense of humor. He really does, and that day I was surprised, but there I was, a nobody from nowhere, drinking a Diet Coke with the President of the United States. So when your fellow colleagues and students tell you that it is not possible for you to do anything extraordinary, just remind them that you heard about a story of a nobody from nowhere that had a Diet Coke with the President of the United States. Now, I say that because I was there advocating for something that was very, very important to me. And you are far too young to know who Paul Harvey was, but you can Google it and find it. He used to say, and the rest of the story. And the rest of the story is this. Here I was that particular day advocating that we should move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and indeed, this president did it. This president did it. This president delivered on his promise. So, a nobody from nowhere getting to be a part of history, something that every other presidential candidate had promised, but only this president, Donald J. Trump, actually got it done. Only this president. But there's also another little part of the story that many of you don't know about, because we get to see the fact that we have unemployment at record lows, an economy that is thriving, regulations that have been slashed, truly a change in Washington, D.C. that is unparalleled. And we see an embassy, we've got a real evidence of his commitment to those promises, because we have an embassy that is in Jerusalem, which ultimately is a sign to the rest of the world that this president is a promise-keeping president. He really is a promise-keeping president. But there's another little part of the story, because in the room just next to where the president and I had our Diet Coke together was a huge whiteboard. And on that whiteboard was every single campaign promise he made, when he had made it, and he was going down checking them off one at a time. This president is serious about getting it done. He is serious. So I share that story with you to let you know that there is a calling on each one of your lives. There is a special, unique calling, and what I ask you to do is, when that still small voice tells you and nudges you to get involved or stay involved or do something that may make you so sick that you have to pull over on the side of the road and throw up, that if you're willing to be obedient and dare to dream that impossible things are possible in this greatest country that we have the privilege of calling home, that I can tell you that not with just this nobody from nowhere, but with you from somewhere that you call home, he will use you in a way that candidly will transform our country. And so on behalf of the President of the United States, who knows that he gets his support and that it is not easy to get support from people in your generation with the kind of pressures that you face, I want to say thank you. Thank you for staying involved in a fight to make America first, to make America great again, and to keep America great. God bless you. I'm ready for some of your questions. Thank you so much. We love you guys. Wow, the energy is unbelievable. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I've got about 10 minutes for questions. So I see that we're queuing up here. And so if they're really hard questions, I'm going to let somebody else answer them. But go ahead with the easy questions.
My name is Ralph Cure. I'm from Parkland, Florida, where the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting happened. And currently there's a bill in the Senate. It's called the Eagles Act, and it's to expand the Secret Service's threat detection wing, which would help identify future school shooters and people like that. And I was wondering if, when the time comes to vote for it in the House, would you support that bill?
You know, I would have to look at it. What I'm willing to do, I can tell you this, is we need to make sure that schools are a safe place to not only learn, but also to gather. And what we've done is we've done a poor job. One of the big things that I saw is that the federal government, the FBI in that particular case, had a number of warnings where they could have stopped things. And so what we need to make sure is not only the envelope is there, but if that is something where we have an extra layer of security and protection, I'm all in, willing to do it. Actually, one of the first bills I actually sponsored as a freshman member of Congress was one to expand our school resource officers to make sure that we had people on campuses, whether they're elementary schools or high schools or college campuses. And so I'm not familiar with that exact piece of legislation, but it sounds like it's consistent with something that I can support. And if we can get it out of the Senate, I'll be glad to support it in the House. But thank you so much. Appreciate it. Okay. All right. Over to my left. I don't go to my left very often, but I'll go to my left to take your question.
Thank you. My name is Brandon Whiproad from Wyoming. So my question is about immigration, and specifically people that are under the Dreamers Act. How would we handle that situation for people who have only lived in America and have only known this land when their parents brought them over illegally?
Yeah, so a lot of the immigration debate really gets focused on the dreamers, and really the immigration crisis that we have at the border is not because of dreamers, it's because we have an open border that we have to close down, not just from a standpoint of immigration, but from a standpoint of security. And so a number of us have been willing to look at the prerequisite is to have a secure southern border. And if we have a secure southern border, I think what we can do is look at a finite number of dreamers or anyone who has come here and is here in the United States. Deporting dreamers is not necessarily the thing that even conservatives support. I can tell you that there's a compassionate part of even my most radical conservative right-wing colleagues on that particular issue. But here's the problem. We've talked about it for a long time, and we've done nothing in Congress. You can go back to Ronald Reagan's time, and what we essentially did was give amnesty without securing our border. And so as we look at that and talking to the president, it's about getting a good border security. Yes, I do agree we need to build the wall, and we need to make sure that we do that. But I can tell you, when we had 144,000 people that came across our southern border just in the month of June, you know, when you start looking at it with these trends, you're from Wyoming. Well, we had enough people come across our southern border in 1 month that inside of a year, we would have had 2.5 Wyomings that just came across our southern border in 1 year. So we've got to get control of that. And I think once we do that, dealing with the dreamers in a compassionate way becomes much easier. But it's a great question.
Hi, so I'm Christian from Pennsylvania. I actually admire you standing up for the president. So my question is, we only have you. It feels like Doug Collins from Georgia and Jim Jordan. We had Trey Gowdy, but we lost him. So what can we do to get more Republican members of Congress to have the passion of you and Trey and Doug? Because I feel like the other side has 50-1 on our side.
Well, they do have a lot more, you know, but let me just tell you, I will take me and Jim Jordan and Doug Collins and Devin Nunes and a few others supporting the president with the power of all of you behind me versus all of them without you. I like my odds. So here's what we have to do. We have to encourage more of my colleagues to come here and actually feel the energy that's in the room, because you're the next generation, one. The second part of that is you need to help them see the light. But if they don't see the light, they need to feel the heat. And y'all need to get on the phones and call them and say, it's time that you stand up for the president. You know, it's real easy right now to stand up for the president because he's winning. But you know what? What happens is there's a whole lot of people, they're afraid that if the president stands for this and they don't, that they're going to get thrown out of office. So here's another way that we can do it. Let's get behind term limits and make sure that we have term limits and throw the bums out. I mean, let's throw them out if we can. If they're not willing to stand up for the president, they've got no business standing in Congress. All right, that's my thought. But get on the phones. Listen, I know this is a newsflash to all of you, but when you call in, we don't have a little caller ID that says how old you are. All right, so call in over and over and over again. What happened, my chief of staff is behind us right here. Your first phone calls go to the interns. They take all the incoming. They take, in my office, a lot more colorful language than perhaps some other offices. You know, I'm like enemy number one to the left. You know, if you look at the left blogs, don't go out and look at it, because all the things they say about me are, well, it's deplorable. But here's what we need to do. If you keep calling, what happens, the interns get busy, and then it goes over to the legislative staff, and eventually it gets to the chief of staff. And if the chief of staff gets 1 or 2 phone calls, he comes out and says, listen, we got a problem here. And so if they're not supporting the president, and I'm talking about our party not supporting the president, they need to hear from all of you, because you're doing the door knocking and the campaigning and all of that. They need you more than really they realize. So thank you so much. All right.
Hi, I'm Cooper Stevens. I live in West North Carolina, and I just wanted to know
Where in Western North Carolina?
Hickory.
All right, God bless you. Now, so for all of you that don't know North Carolina, it is literally 12 hours from one part of North Carolina to the far end of North Carolina. So when he says he's in Hickory in the western part, he is correct. There's another 3.5 hours to the west of Hickory, but thank you for being here. Go ahead.
I actually wanted to know how it could help in campaigning and all that, to like get either Trump or our local Republicans further in their like race, like in their not presidential, but their political race.
Yeah, so I think probably the biggest thing is with the local Republican Party there is pretty active. Are you in Catawba County? Yes. All right, so in Catawba County, they've got a pretty active group. We have active in Burke and Caldwell, which is very close. But I can tell you, North Carolina is one of those states the president's going to come back a number of times. He'll be in the western part, whether it's in Hickory or Asheville, he'll be close enough. And then once you do that, we can help feed that out. So if you'll just get with us, we'll connect you with everybody. But it's a great question, and thank you for being willing to volunteer. Yeah. I got 1 minute and 32 seconds left. So.
Last question, yeah.
Hi, my name is Olivia Crow, and I'm from Kansas City, Missouri. I was wondering what you would like to happen that hasn't happened yet.
What would I like to happen that hasn't happened? That's a long list, and it's going to take more than 1 minute and 9 seconds, but I'll give you my top 3. One is we do need to secure the border. It's time that we get serious about that, all right? The second thing we need to do is it relates to health care. We need to make sure that health care is once again affordable and prescription drug prices come down. And then the last thing, which we're going to go the opposite way today, sadly, with a vote later today, we need to shrink the size of government and empower every single person in here where it's not the power of the federal government, but that it's the power at the local and state government where the real living happens. So those are the things that we have to do. Those are the things. Thank you so much. So I'm going to close in the final 18 seconds with this. Here's a challenge. Guys, you are on Instagram and Twitter and Snapchat more than any of the colleagues on Capitol Hill. You can take a message that actually will get picked up very quickly. And if you will continue to be bold and to make sure that your message is taken to your colleagues, it won't stop there. Because when something starts to trend on Twitter, guess what? They have to talk about it on MSNBC and CNN and Fox and everywhere else. They have to talk about it. And your power of being able to come together and work very hard will make a difference in this country. I'm so hopeful and so excited because of the energy that's in this room. In fact, when I was with the president yesterday, we were talking about all of you. And he says, you know what? If there's one thing I know, that if I called on the folks that are there over at the Turning Point gathering, they will march on Capitol Hill in a second, and that's the kind of confidence. God bless you. We love you. Thank you so much. We love you. God bless you.